In 1945, American soldiers entered a compound in Manchuria. What they found inside made grown men vomit. But you've probably never heard about it. Because the doctors who did this were never punished. They got jobs, raised families, died peacefully in their beds. This is the story of Unit 731, where Japanese doctors turned human beings into lab rats, where screams echoed through operating rooms, where thousands died in ways you can't imagine. And the worst part? The world let them get away with it. This is going to be hard to hear, but these people deserve to be remembered. World War II ended with trials at Nuremberg. Nazi doctors hanged for their crimes. But in Asia, something equally horrific happened, and the perpetrators walked free. Why? Because America wanted their research data, so they made a deal: immunity for information. Unit 731 was erased from history, victims silenced, evidence destroyed. For decades, Japan denied it even existed. But survivors remembered, documents survived, and the truth, no matter how horrific, deserves to be told. What you're about to hear happened to real people: fathers, mothers, children. This is their story. They had no idea what was coming. Liu Mingquan was a farmer, 28 years old. He was told he'd be working in a lumber camp. Good pay, 3 meals a day. He said goodbye to his wife and infant daughter, promised he'd be back in 6 months. He never saw them again. When Liu arrived at the compound in Pingfang, the gates locked behind him. No lumber, no jobs, just concrete buildings, guards with rifles, and a smell he couldn't identify yet. But he would soon. What Liu saw in the first 24 hours would break him. New prisoners were stripped, shaved, given numbers. Liu became Subject 394. They were herded into cells, concrete floors, no windows, a single bucket in the corner. At 3 a.m., screaming started from down the hall. A man's voice, begging in Chinese, then in Japanese, then just screaming. It went on for 7 hours. When morning came, guards dragged something past Liu's cell, covered in a sheet, but he could see the blood trail. One prisoner whispered, "Welcome to the log factory." Logs. That's what the doctors called them. Not people. Logs. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what they did during the day. On his 3rd day, Liu was taken to a room that looked like a hospital operating theater. Bright lights, surgical tools, men in white coats. For a moment he felt relief. Maybe this was just a medical exam. The doctor smiled at him, spoke gently, asked him to lie down on the table. Then they strapped his wrists, his ankles, his chest. The doctor picked up a syringe, clear liquid inside. "This is just a vaccine," he said in Mandarin, "to keep you healthy." Liu felt the needle pierce his arm, cold spreading through his veins. Within an hour, his fever spiked to 104. He couldn't stop shaking. The doctors stood around him with clipboards, taking notes, watching him suffer. That's when Liu understood. He wasn't a patient, he was an experiment. And this was just the beginning. Every symptom was recorded. Temperature every 30 minutes, descriptions of pain, color of discharge, time until death. Because that was the goal, not to cure, to document. The disease Liu was injected with was bubonic plague. Plague, the Black Death that killed millions in medieval Europe, was being weaponized, and Liu was test subject 394 in a database of thousands. Doctors measured how long it took the bacteria to multiply, how quickly it spread through his lymph nodes, what his body looked like when it failed. They needed precise data, so they kept him alive, barely, just long enough to complete the study. History barely mentions what happened next. Because Liu's suffering was considered mild compared to what happened in Building 7. This is where it becomes nightmare. Li Shu-ying was 19 years old, a college student arrested for anti-Japanese sentiment. Her crime? Refusing to bow to a Japanese flag. In Unit 731, she became Subject 609. One morning, guards took her to the surgical wing. She saw the operating table, the lights, the instruments. She started screaming before they even touched her. The head surgeon was Dr. Ishii Shiro, a man with round glasses and a calm voice. He explained almost politely that they needed to study the human vascular system under live conditions. Anesthesia would alter blood pressure, he said. We need accurate readings. Li was strapped down, fully conscious. They cut her open from sternum to pelvis. For the next 4 hours, doctors removed her organs, one by one, while she was still alive. They photographed each step, took measurements, discussed findings. One doctor later testified, "She begged us to kill her, but we needed her heart beating for the data." This happened to hundreds of people, men, women, children as young as 8. In the winter of 1943, temperatures in Manchuria dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. Yoshimura Hisato saw an opportunity. Japanese soldiers were losing fingers and toes to frostbite. The military needed solutions. So Yoshimura designed an experiment. Prisoners were taken outside, naked, arms exposed. Guards poured water over their limbs and waited. Yoshimura timed how long it took for flesh to freeze solid. He tapped frozen arms with sticks, listened for the sound, like tapping a board, one assistant wrote in his diary. Then came the treatment phase. They tested different thawing methods: boiling water, gradual warming, direct flame. Nothing was done to save the subjects. It was to see what worked and what made the damage worse. One prisoner's arm shattered when a guard bumped it. Frozen tissue broke like glass. The man was still alive. But these experiments were considered humane compared to what happened in the plague bomb tests. By 1944, Unit 731 had perfected a weapon, ceramic bombs filled with plague-infected fleas. But they needed to test effectiveness, so they chose a village, Kongdae Village, population 300. Planes flew overhead at dawn. Residents thought they were being bombed, but no explosions came. Just insects, thousands of fleas falling from the sky. Within 5 days, people started getting sick. Fever, swollen lymph nodes, black spots spreading across skin. The Japanese military cordoned off the village. No one in, no one out. Doctors from Unit 731 arrived, not to help, but to observe. They took samples, blood, tissue, photographs. They watched people die in the streets, mothers holding dead children, elderly collapsing in doorways. One survivor, Chen Wei, was 12 years old. He watched his entire family die in 3 days. When the plague finally burned out, 267 people were dead. Unit 731's report, field test successful, recommended for strategic deployment. And this is where things became even more terrifying. They wanted to know what happened to pilots at extreme altitudes, so they built a pressure chamber. Subjects were sealed inside, air pressure gradually reduced to simulate high-altitude conditions. No oxygen masks, no protective gear, just human bodies subjected to conditions that shouldn't exist at ground level. At 30,000 feet equivalent, blood vessels in their eyes burst. At 40,000 feet, their eardrums ruptured. At 50,000 feet, subjects convulsed, organs hemorrhaged. Some died instantly. Others lingered for hours, bleeding from every orifice. One witness described it. Their eyes looked like they wanted to pop out of their skulls. The doctors recorded every second. Time to unconsciousness, time to organ failure, time to death. Approximately 200 people died in that chamber, their suffering measured in graphs and charts. What happened next still haunts the few survivors who escaped.
Prisoners weren't allowed to communicate. Solitary cells, no shared spaces. But they found ways. Tap codes turned walls, messages scratched into concrete with fingernails, notes hidden in food bowls. One message, discovered decades later, carved into a cell wall. "My name is Zhang Hua. I am from Harbin. I was a teacher. I want someone to know I existed." Below it, in different handwriting, "Your name is remembered, brother. Chen." These small acts of humanity became survival itself. When doctors tried to dehumanize them, reduce them to numbers, prisoners fought back the only way they could, by insisting they were human, by remembering each other's names, by refusing to become the logs their captors called them. One man took this resistance further than anyone thought possible. His name was Liu Zong, Subject 721. He'd been in Unit 731 for 8 months, survived 3 experiments, watched dozens die. He knew he'd die there, but he decided how. For weeks, he loosened a bar in his cell window, millimeter by millimeter, using a nail he'd found. One night, he squeezed through. The compound was massive, electrified fences, guard towers, searchlights. Liu made it 200 meters. Then the alarm sounded. Dogs, gunfire, shouting. He was captured within minutes. But here's what's important. The guards didn't shoot him. They could have, but they didn't. Because Unit 731 had a policy, escapees were to be kept alive for special experiments. Liu was taken to a room he'd never seen before. The doctors called it the deterrent chamber. They injected him with multiple diseases at once, plague, cholera, typhoid, then put him in a glass-walled room in the center of the prisoner yard so everyone could watch him die. It took 11 days. The message was clear. Don't try to escape. But that wasn't the most horrific use of human bodies. They needed to test the effectiveness of flamethrowers, grenades, chemical weapons. Mannequins wouldn't provide accurate data, so they used people. Prisoners were tied to stakes in an open field. Soldiers tested weapons at various distances, flamethrower range, shrapnel patterns, burn severity. One survivor, a Chinese laborer who worked at the compound, testified, "I heard screaming from the testing field. It would go on for hours, then stop, then start again with new subjects." Chemical weapons were particularly horrific. Mustard gas, phosgene, experimental neurotoxins. Subjects would convulse, foam at the mouth, claw at their own throats. The military needed to know how much gas to deploy per square kilometer, how long until incapacitation, what protective gear worked. Hundreds died answering these questions, their deaths measured in tactical efficacy reports. And this is where things get even darker, because some prisoners weren't even adults. Unit 731 had a special section, Building 8. It was called the Pediatric Research Wing. Children as young as 5 were kept there. The experiments on children were the same as adults: vivisection, disease injection, frostbite, pressure chambers. But the psychological torture was worse, because children didn't understand. They asked when they could go home, when they'd see their parents, if they'd been bad. One nurse, who later confessed, described a boy, maybe 7 years old, subject 412. He'd been injected with plague, fever climbing, lymph nodes swelling. He kept asking, "When will the medicine make me better?" The nurse said nothing, because there was no medicine, just observation. The boy died holding a toy soldier one of the guards had given him. The report listed him as juvenile male subject, weight 21 kilograms, time to death 73 hours. No name, no age, no humanity, just data. But even in this nightmare, there were small acts of mercy. Not every Japanese person at Unit 731 was a willing participant. Some were conscripted soldiers, others were low-level staff. One guard, his name never recorded, started leaving things in cells: extra rice, a blanket, once a small piece of chocolate. Prisoners knew it was him. He never spoke, never made eye contact, but those small kindnesses meant everything. One survivor later wrote, "In a place designed to erase our humanity, someone reminded us we were still human." The guard was caught eventually. A doctor found contraband in a cell, traced it back. The guard was executed, not for humanitarian reasons, for compromising experimental integrity, because even mercy was a crime. What happened next shows how some prisoners found strength in the darkest moments. Against all odds, prisoners created a communication network: tap codes, whispers during transport, messages hidden in waste buckets. They warned each other, "Building 7 today, don't volunteer for anything." They shared information about guards, which ones were cruel, which ones might look away. They passed on news from outside, rumors of Japanese defeats, Allied advances, hope even when it seemed impossible. One prisoner, Zhu Lin, later testified about a message that spread through the cells: "The Americans are coming. Hold on, just hold on." It gave people reason to survive one more day, even when the experiments continued, even when friends died. They held on, because someone, somewhere, was fighting for them. But as the war turned against Japan, Unit 731 faced a terrible decision. August 1945, Japan was losing. The Soviet Union was advancing through Manchuria. Unit 731 had a problem: evidence. Buildings full of human remains, mass graves, documents detailing thousands of murders. Ishii Shiro gave the order: destroy everything. They started with the living prisoners. Those too sick to walk were shot. Others were given lethal injections. Some were locked in buildings that were then set on fire. One worker recalled, "The screaming lasted for hours. We could hear them trying to break through the doors." Then they burned the bodies, dynamited the buildings, buried the graves. When Soviet troops arrived days later, they found ruins. A few survivors, mostly Chinese laborers who'd been kept in separate barracks, but the prisoners, the logs, were gone. Estimated killed in the final week, over 3,000, murdered to hide the evidence of murder. But a few people survived, and their testimonies are the only reason we know what happened. His name was Wang Wenhai. He survived because he was a carpenter, The Japanese needed laborers to build the compound. He wasn't a test subject, but he saw everything. After the war, Wang tried to tell people, Chinese officials, journalists, international investigators. No one believed him. The stories were too horrific. Surely he was exaggerating. Japan denied everything, said Unit 731 was a water purification unit. Wang spent 40 years trying to get people to listen. He kept a journal, drew diagrams, named names. In 1982, a Japanese journalist finally listened. The story broke worldwide. Wang Wenhai was 73 years old. He cried during the interview, said, "I thought I'd die before anyone believed me." But Wang wasn't the only one fighting for truth. Dr. Ken Yusawa was a young military surgeon during World War II. He participated in vivisections at Unit 731. After the war, he went home, became a civilian doctor, had a family, and he was haunted. For decades, he said nothing, but in 1995, at 78 years old, he held a press conference. "I was a war criminal. I cut open living people. I am responsible for their deaths." He described the experiments in detail, named other doctors. He begged China and the international community for forgiveness. He said, "We were told they weren't human, that they were criminals, spies, less than animals, but they were people, and I helped kill them." Ken Yusawa spent the rest of his life speaking at schools, demanding Japan acknowledge the truth. He died in 2005, one of the few perpetrators who ever admitted what they'd done. But most of the doctors never faced justice. When the war ended, America had a choice: prosecute the Unit 731 doctors or make a deal. They chose the deal. General MacArthur's team offered immunity to Ishii Shiro and his staff in exchange for their research data, the biological weapons research, the human experimentation results, data that couldn't be replicated because no other country had conducted such extensive tests on living humans. The deal was made in secret. The Soviet Union wanted Ishii tried as a war criminal. China demanded justice, but America refused to.
Instead, Ishii became a consultant. He advised the U.S. biological warfare program, helped develop Cold War strategies. He lived comfortably in Tokyo until his death in 1959. Natural causes, age 67. Never arrested, never charged, never punished. The man responsible for over 10,000 deaths died a free man. And he wasn't alone. The doctors of Unit 731 went on to live normal lives. Some became university professors. One became president of the Japan Medical Association. Others ran pharmaceutical companies, wrote textbooks. Many are buried with honors. Their families still live in Japan, descendants who often don't know or refuse to acknowledge what their grandfathers did. Japan has never officially apologized for Unit 731. The experiments are not taught in Japanese schools. Victims' families have sued for recognition and compensation. Almost all lawsuits have been dismissed. To this day, Japan's official stance is insufficient evidence to confirm systematic human experimentation. Despite survivor testimony, despite documents, despite photographs, the victims remain uncompensated, the perpetrators unpunished, and the world moved on. But there's one place that refuses to forget. In Harbin, China, where Unit 731 once stood, there's now a museum. It sits on the exact site of the compound. You can walk through reconstructed cells, see the ovens where bodies were burned, stand in the rooms where experiments happened. The walls are lined with photographs, not of the experiments, those are too graphic, but of the victims before Unit 731, farmers, teachers, students, children, smiling in family photos, living ordinary lives. Above the entrance, in Chinese, Japanese, and English, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. You might be wondering why I told you this story, why I made you sit through an hour of horror, because these people deserve to be remembered, not as numbers, not as logs, but as human beings. Wang Mei, who died hoping to save her son, Liu Zeng, who tried to escape, Subject 412, the 7-year-old boy who asked when he'd get better. Their names are mostly lost, but their suffering is documented, and if we forget them, if we let their deaths disappear into history, then they died for nothing. Unit 731 happened because people believed other people could be less than human. That's the lesson. Not that Japanese people are evil, not that all soldiers are monsters, but that when we dehumanize others, when we call them criminals, enemies, less than us, we make atrocities possible, and it can happen anywhere, to anyone. The last survivor of Unit 731 died in 2018. No living witnesses remain. Soon, everyone who even knew someone who was there will be gone, and Unit 731 will become just another history lesson, a paragraph in a textbook, a Wikipedia page, unless we remember. Unless we tell their stories, unless we insist that what happened to them matters. So share this video, talk about it. Don't let this history disappear, because 10,000 people died in that compound. They died in agony, in terror, alone. The least we can do is remember their names, even if we only know a few. In memory of the victims of Unit 731, may we never forget.